everyone. Welcome back to Around the Table with the AOTR. I'm Sai Marie Johnson and joined tonight by my phenomenal co host, who happens to be celebrating a birthday, Beverly L. Anderson. Tonight, we're honored to host an essential voice for gender expansive people, Savannah Hauk. Savannah is the author of the ELIT award winning Living with Crossdressing series, co host of the Fox and the Phoenix podcast, and a powerful advocate for duality, identity, and self acceptance. We are so happy to welcome you to the table here in 2026. We were supposed to get you earlier in the year, but we kind of had to reschedule that. So I'm very happy that we finally got you here at the table. Savannah, thank you for joining us tonight.
Thank you. First off, happy birthday to Beverly. I hear she's 29. Amazing. What an achievement. And
Yeah.
yeah, and I'm so and I'm so excited to be here with you all because I know it's been long coming since last year, but yeah, I'm excited. I'm excited to be here.
All right, well, let's jump right into it. So,
Okay.
Savannah, your books are incredibly important resources for people exploring their identity and for their partners as well. We're excited to dive into that wisdom behind that advocacy.
Absolutely. So let's begin with the origin of your writing journey. So you've lived a successful dual gender life and wrote Living with Cross Dressing, Defining a New Normal. What was the critical, unaddressed narrative in the existing literature that compelled you to write your first book?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it is really foundational to like why I wrote it. I was talking to Beverly before the show that I had written several other books, fiction that kind of got me primed to be a writer in general. I had a girlfriend, and at the time, I told her about Savannah before we got serious, and she was unaware of like what it all really meant to be with a gender diverse or gender expansive partner. And so I pointed her into the direction of existing literature that I thought would be helpful. Unfortunately, as she's reading, she did devour the reading, and I kept asking her how it was going and was she thinking and did she have any questions. And in the literature I provided her, the stories always ended up being, hi, I'm happy to be gender expansive, non transitioning. And then eventually, either by the end of the book or the fact that we all know what happened to said persons after the books, they did transition. So, what I did not find in the scope of literature out there that either was erotica or self help that was all about transition or really surrounding the transitioning transgender person was something more along the lines of like, hi, I'm happy to be quote unquote cross dressing, non transitioning. And here is a story of how that looks. And so, because my girlfriend was struggling with the literature provided, I kind of just took it upon myself to just start the process of writing my story and also interviewing other couples who were going through very similar things where they, the husband came out to them in marriage after many years, and like what does that look like. Also couples who got together, knowing only the fem side of the partner, and then like introducing them to the male side at some point, and how is that going. And so it was more of like a deep dive into here's what it looks like to be coupled with a gender expansive person.
All right, that's really informative, I feel like. So, whenever we're thinking about people out here that are initiate for the uninitiative, can you clearly define the difference between cross-dressing as an action or expression and the umbrella term of transgender? And also, why is clarifying this distinction so important to your advocacy?
Yeah, it comes in many layers. First off, I always said I was a transvestite, and that was in like 1996 that I accepted that for myself. But the word tranny or transvestite was very stigmatized. So I said, nope, I'm jumping ship off that label and going straight into crossdresser, which is basically the non Latin version of what a transvestite is, and like hung my hat on that term and self expression. But as I went forward, I realized that to say I am a crossdresser spoke nothing about what my transness was. Like it's a label, but it really didn't determine anything for my identity of like why do I cross dress. So the first thing I wanted to tackle was, as a cross dresser or the act of cross dressing, what is the motivating element that makes you take upon the action of male to female or female to male dressing, either partially, fully, whatever it looks like, to then say, well, what is a driver? That's why later on I took on the self-describer of dual gender, because I'm happy as a male, I'm happy as a female. I need this as my outlet to be Savannah. But cross-dressing didn't describe that. Cross-dressing just described how I went from male to female in any one day to affect that presentation. So that was number one. Number two is, why the distinction in the overarching transgender umbrella? Well, transgender covers lots of ground. The umbrella holds a lot of elements and a lot of gender types underneath it. What also has happened over the last 30 years is those who were previously called transsexuals are now called transgender. So we have a problem, or we have a confusion of when transgender is the umbrella that crossdressers, dual gender, non-binary, agender, transgender, two-spirit, etc., 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 all live under the umbrella of transgender. And then there is a subset of people who are in the midst of male to female or female to male transitioning medically, cosmetically, whatever it looks like, fully, partially. That is those who call themselves transgender. So all I want to do is make sure that we are included under the general umbrella of the transgender community, and not to be confused with those who are transitioning under the transgender umbrella. Now, that doesn't mean people who use that doesn't mean that those who say, I was just a crossdresser, may or may not move to a self discovery that positions them to take a journey further than just wearing the clothes and adopting a personality or an identity. Those people who do see the act of cross-dressing as a bridge to self-discovery, yes, absolutely can go on to transition. And that is not a hard and fast rule. It's not an if-then statement. It is saying some people are very comfortable, like where I am. I've been doing this for, of my 55 years, I've been knowledgeable or understanding of Savannah in some way, shape, or form for 50 years. And I've never thought, ooh, transitioning's in my future. But for some, transitioning is absolutely their future, and cross-dressing is what that discovery process allowed them to see.
So, your book emphasizes the perspective of partners. What is the most common fear or misconception that the cis women partners of cross dressing men express, and how does your book seek to alleviate that?
Ooh, side that is deep and vast. I think the first misconception is that they are going to transition. Their husbands. That's usually number one. Two, gay, that they must be gay, because if you adopt the clothing of a female, that must mean that you're taking on all the attributes of a female. So therefore, you must want to be with men. So that's a second fear. Additionally, there are so many other psychological fears of, like, well, if my male partner loves to dress in high heels, fishnet, and leather, I'm assuming that's how they want me to dress and how they want me to be a female in their life. So all of a sudden, it's a competition between partners and a miscommunication between the partners, where just because I like to dress a certain way doesn't mean that's my expectation of what you should do. There is also the divide of equality in a relationship, the compromise, whether they are the male partner, the gender diverse partner is accepted, like outright. There's a big, vast difference between intolerance, tolerance, acceptance, and celebration. So there is another fear about, well, can I actually show up for my gender expansive partner in a way that they need me to? And then if I can, how do I remain true and honest to myself and my authenticity as the female partner? And like, where does the dynamic shift? All of a sudden, every social construct you had created for yourself or had indoctrinated or embedded in you or ingrained in you is all of a sudden out the window, because you're in a completely different space where, when it comes to the dynamic between you, your husband, and suddenly this new person, this female person that may or may not be exactly like her husband, but somehow is different. And how does that feel? What does that look like? And the fear of, like, where do they fit into the conversation anymore? So I'm sorry. So answer the second part. Sorry, the second part of that question was, how do I try to alleviate or address those things? And honestly, the first book, even the second book, it was addressed as these are things to look at and to take upon yourselves in your partnership, because there are no hard and fast rules about how you will engage with your partner and what is your comfortability in conversation, what is your education about the topic of gender diversity. What is your upbringing? What does it tell you? There's 1,000 ways. So I could not sit there and say, here's the top 10 ways that you get to know, get to understand, get to celebrate your partner in your place with your partner. That's almost unrealistic. It can't be done. But what I can do is just illustrate the storytelling of these partnerships and what they are telling me to for me to write on their behalf, and just have a story that's real life, and also try to say, listen, it's always going to come up with communication, understanding, compassion, empathy, and honesty.
So, you've spoken about the societal shift after moving to New York City in the 90s. How much has the visibility of the LGBTQIA community generally, and specifically the drag community, influenced your self acceptance and visibility today?
Well, in the 90s, when I moved to New York City, I moved from the Midwest, from Detroit, very conservative. There wasn't drag brunches happening downtown as far as I knew. So I never saw a drag queen until I went to New York City, went to Lucky Chang's, where the entire wait staff and performers are all drag. Seeing two men holding hands, seeing two women holding hands, and Soho. All this new diversity that was so foreign and taboo in the Midwest, in a conservative Midwest environment, suddenly is wide open and full on display. And so, absolutely, my wife at the time actually spoke to the bartender at Lucky Chang's, and her name was Imelda, as in Imelda Marcos. And she was talking to Imelda about me. And so I got to speak to her as well, and kind of form a quick kinship of, like, we're all just people, and, just kind of like discovering myself through that experiment or that experience, to just be like, wow, these are just people in the world, and I'm also a person in the world. And if they can do it, I can do it. And that's when, like, in that year, I met so many people across work and just living in the city, to really start having the capacity to accept myself in that way. Even if it was just like 20% of what I am now, like in acceptance, like I did finally accept the moniker, and then slowly over the years, still to this day, I'm self-accessing, I'm hearing stories, I'm listening to what people are doing, and I'm capitalizing on that for myself and my own confidence out in the world.
So, in your book, Discovering Your True Identity, you prompt readers towards self assessment.
Yes.
What is the most crucial question a person struggling with a periodic feminine expression must honestly ask themselves to move forward?
Why? I mean, simply put, is that you have to be honest about the why, because everybody's so afraid of the destination or the what if. If I do this thing, then what happens? So instead of like focusing on the here and now, or even unpacking your past, you're constantly fearful of the future that you'll never materialize, because you are just so terrified of it, and you've grown up being terrified of being different. If you're in a very small town community, if you're very religious, if you have very conservative parents or upbringing or community, all these things work against you. So the most important thing you could do in your self-assessment is, and again, you have to be honest with yourself. You can't sit there and just like ask a question and hope the answer befalls you. No, you have to do the work. You have to investigate externally, read the stories, follow influencers, see what resonates with you. And once you start understanding the things that resonate with you, then you can actually just sit down quietly with yourself and say, what does that mean to me? Which things should I adopt? Which things make sense? Which feel right? What feels true? What makes absolutely no sense at all to me in this moment? It's about finally opening that door to have an honest discussion about your truth. And until you can do that, or not be afraid of what the answer might be from your subconscious as it bubbles up into your face, that's the most important thing. If you can't have an honest conversation with yourself, then you're constantly going to be gaslighting yourself.
So, the current political climate includes intense debates about trans rights, gender affirming care, and public life. As a visible advocate for gender expansive people, What is the most harmful piece of legislation or rhetoric you are fighting right now?
Well, I mean, I could go down the list of the hundreds upon hundreds of state and federal bills or whatever that have been introduced on the floors and or passed. So I'll target rhetoric instead. And the rhetoric is there needs to be a boogeyman or woman in this case, whatever the pronouns may be. So in this case, there is a boogie person, and because ethnicity and race have they did their jobs. Communism's making a comeback. Apparently, communists are big. Socialists are big on the rise again for like being the boogeyman of like, oh, if I say you're communist, all the red scare that falls into your brain as a result. But depending on the generation you grew up in, so the trans community has, because of our progress between the 80s to the early aughts, we got more visible. We were having our pride parades. More people are coming out or admitting or acknowledging to the world that they're trans in some way. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh, now we are the menace. We are the big scary thing that has to be eradicated in order for the normal people to be safe. And so when you look at the proclivity of like how many trans people exist, one, you'll never have a true telling because a lot of people have not reported that even anonymously. But the idea that like we are a fraction of the demographic, and yet somehow we are the biggest nightmare facing society. So instead of tackling real issues, instead we have to have a villain, we have to have an enemy. And unfortunately, in this generation, at least in the last decade, we have become that. And so until we can kind of push that over the finish line in terms of like, hey, we're not the enemy, we're just like you. And that's where my advocacy needs to fall. It's like I am doing more day-to-day work. I'm changing minds or letting people see their own truth, like one person at a time. I am not a outright freedom fighter where I'm rallying the troops and waving flags. I'm more boots on the ground and just living life authentically so that people can see it. And if people can see that I'm that way and realize, oh, they're not scary, they're just like me, but have eyeshadow, then you're changing minds slowly and in the right direction.
So you live a dual life, Savannah, and your male persona. This is often dictated by professional and community settings, I'm sure. So, how do you manage the emotional and psychological switch between those two states of being?
That is a great question. To be fair, I want the audience to know, and I do it in my presentations as well. I ask the question, how much time do you think I spend as Savannah is my question. And people raise their hand and throw numbers out there. In reality, in 2025, I think Savannah existed physically in the world about 4% of my life. So 96% of my life, I am in my male role as Chuck, and it's just like conferences, weekends, what have you. Savannah has the ability to be active and available and present. They're really, and because I have the ability to have a routine, dress freely, go out as I want. I don't have a lot of restrictions, especially now. And as a result, there isn't a lot of emotional impact negatively moving back and forth between personas. But there was a time when Savannah was more covert. Savannah did not have the support of a partner. So it was like, don't ask, don't tell, don't just don't let me know, or I have to do it in secret. Those became very dangerous and toxic and depressive states of being. Like to just have that moment, very frantically have a moment to be Savannah, and then just have to undo it and go back to quote unquote normal life. So that was a desperation in a depressive way of being. But having a more balanced life, having it be a known quantity, a known factor to be Savannah, having a routine, those have made the switch back and forth seamless.
So, your book emphasizes that cross dressing is often a non fetish and non transitioning thing. Why is it necessary to stress the non fetish aspect of this identity for broader societal acceptance?
For exactly what you said. The answer is in the question, which is you have to state it because it is almost ingrained in the idea of what cross dressing is. Cross dressing, at least from the 1950s onward, was treated as a very underground way of being. There was so many laws on the books in different counties and states that if a man was wearing a dress, they could be arrested. It was illegal to be a crossdresser. You go back to Magnus Hirschfeld, in the turn of the 20th century, and they, in his institute, were giving out almost like hall passes so that you could give it to a policeman to know that this is something you had to do. You had to dress this way clinically, medically. So that was like a huge thing in the early 20th century. But then here in America, as post-war, called post-World War II, like it was very underground and it was considered a fetish because that's just by nature. It was hidden, covert, and a little risque because just the idea of man wearing lingerie or wearing women's clothing is kind of put on that pedestal. So the idea that it's like, listen, we don't do this necessarily for sexual needs. Like there are many who wear women's clothing because they get a sexual release out of it or a sexual charge. They adopt that persona for that specific reason. That is not by and large all cross-dressers or all dual gender diverse people. It doesn't all stem from the need for sex or need for sexual release. And because that was so tied to it, like the sexuality and the identity and presentation, because of that, it's almost been synonymous with like, well, if you're cross-dressing, it must be because you need to have sex that way. And so to make it to say that out loud that this is a non-fetish, because I was dressed this way, you can't see me, but I was dressed as Savannah all day today. Went to Starbucks twice, came home, did another meeting, and went back out, had dinner at Copper River, came home, and so this to me is just my identity. Am I a sexual person? Is a human being typically a sexual being? Yes, absolutely. But that is not why I dress. I dress because my feminine persona and identity is integral to who I am as a person.
So, when you began writing, you didn't think anyone would read it, yet your work has been supported by thousands. Can you share a moment or a piece of fan mail that made the entire advocacy effort feel profoundly validated?
I'll even do you one better. And you had brought up partners, and like there was a lot of people who read Defining a New Normal who read it because either their gender diverse partner gives them the book or says, "Here, you should read this," or the spouse finds it themselves and does the reading as well. I did have a person every March or April in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. There's a conference called Keystone. And a few years ago, I was there, and there's lunch gatherings where you sit at tables and you get to know each other. And after I left, I had to leave early. And after I left, one of the persons who I spoke to at the table, a cis woman, and her partner was not there at the moment, but a wife actually came up to me and saw me in the lobby, and she told me how she found this book, Living with Crossdressing, Defining a New Normal, and read it, and how it really gave her an appreciation for what her husband's going through and like the ability to have conversations together about it. And she cried. She started crying because she one didn't realize it was me that she was talking to at lunch and then thought she missed her opportunity when she did find out. And then two, that it had such an impact on her in her relationship with her husband. And that was a live in person, very emotional meeting and encounter that I carry with me to this day because, like you said, I didn't think anybody was going to read this. I wrote it primarily for my girlfriend at the time, thinking that would be helpful. I didn't think that it would become what it is, and it probably is a good thing because it had no expectations of its success or not. But knowing that there are people out there, whether they convey it to me in email or a text message or in person or not at all, I know at the very least that some good is coming of it.
So you also wrote Gender 101, an A to Z handbook. What is one concept in gender identity, like the difference between gender identity expression and attraction, that you feel is most widely misunderstood?
Well, we kind of touched on it earlier, which is people assume that if you have a gender identity or any identity, whether you're male or female, non binary, trans, whatever you want to have the label thrown on you or describe yourself as, there typically comes with it a pretty basic misconception that whatever you're presenting as must be what your sexual or romantic attractions are as well. And that is a huge thing that when we talk about what people misunderstand and what they get wrong, is that, just because I dress as a woman doesn't mean I like men. But there are people who, I have several friends who, quote unquote, started off as cross dressers, realized that they were women inside and needed to correct that. And one of them loves, they both love women, whether trans women or cis women. So now they would be considered lesbians, but it gets to be a mind game where it's like, but they were biologically male to begin with. They're like women, so in reality they're not really queer. But now that they look like women and are women, then they are queer as lesbians. So it covers a spectrum. It covers a galaxy of mixing and matching parts and bits and attractions, and to try to pigeonhole us into a very one in zero type of life, especially the human animal. For some reason, and that's also in the Gender 101 book, that we try to think we are above every other creature on this planet in some way because why? We have reasoning, but yet somehow we can't look at animals on this planet and realize that if you're saying God made everything the way he made everything, or they made everything, that there's so much gender diversity in the animal kingdom. Why do we think we're any different? So that was another aspect of that book of like, let's get over ourselves and stop thinking so binary because the world around us is not binary.
So, you've spoken about finding community later in life. What is the single most important action a long closeted crossdresser can take to safely find connection and support?
Well, I'd say, and again, I'm covering the gamut because I know people who live in very remote rural places where the idea that they're going to find somebody in person with like a meetup group or a P flag group or whatever it might look like from a organization standpoint, that is difficult. So typically, I always tell people to look online, especially if you're in a place that doesn't have a major city or a queer presence or some sort of more, liberal, progressive kind of view on culture. So the first thing is really online and do it earnestly. Like, don't just like throw yourself on FetLife and hope for the best, or don't put yourself in a dating app hoping for the best. You have to really put yourself out there. And again, this is even for the closeted people because even on Facebook, if you have a Facebook profile, has no picture, has no posts, like a lot of people are not going to respond to that positively because they think you might be a robot, they think you might be a lurker, a creeper, and that unfortunately is too prevalent in our community as well. So you have to put yourself out there in some way. Be safe, please. Don't take my words and just like start dumping 1,000 pics on a profile. But be cautious, be careful, be safe for yourself and where you are in your life and what you want to be exposed. But yeah, the internet is a beautiful thing if you tap into it the right way. Otherwise, if you do live closer to a bigger city or metropolitan area or something more urban, you can find plenty of groups. Even here in Greenville, South Carolina, First Baptist has a queer group that it runs. And you might think that what Baptist church has, they're cool, they're like queers. Things are changing every day. Things are changing for the better, even if politically it feels like we're taking steps and steps backwards. There's ways of finding your community by just doing a quick Google search.
So, looking ahead to the next 5 to 10 years, what do you predict will be the biggest cultural shift regarding the visibility and acceptance of gender expansive identities that don't fit neatly into the binary?
Man, if you would have asked me that 10 years ago, I would have had hope galore about how much progress we've made and how that being non binary and being queer is going to stop being the thing that describes you anymore. I had high hopes. Unfortunately, with the climate over the last 10 years, it feels very dire. It's a scary time for a lot of us. A lot of people have had to shut off the news for it's just very overwhelming and nerve wracking and stressful and anxiety ridden. But in the next 5 to 10 years, as the group of kids who are growing up with this knowledge already in mind, I think that there will be a slow shifting back to, pre 2010. I feel like we gained a lot of ground, we lost a lot of ground, but I feel as the new generation is up and coming and has queerdom kind of already in our hearts in terms of understanding it, not having bigotry about it, not having just lament and frustration and angst about it. Knowing that that is the future, then I think we'll just start slowly moving the needle to more acceptance. But it's not going to be 5 years. It's not going to be 10 years. We're not going to magically have all the equality in the world that we were hoping for and deserve. But it's coming. But it's going to probably take longer than that.
So, finally, what is the legacy you hope your entire body of work leaves for the next generation of dual gender and cross dressing individuals?
That is an interesting term, legacy. As somebody who does not have kids, I don't have progeny, I don't have that kind of legacy. So I try to build something of myself through my writings, through the podcast, through my advocacy, to basically take away some of the struggle that the next person has. And so if you want to go back to the like who have I affected with my work? Another story is people who found resonance of their life in my story, of the telling of my story, and that brought them out of the shadows, that brought them out of the closet. And for every person you inspire to do that, to be their most authentic self, that then rubs off on the next person around them that they want to inspire because they know how it feels to be inspired or to have success as a result. So if I were to say anything about my legacy, is that I hope that through continued writing and living and breathing advocacy and breathing the community in my own ways, is to just like keep allowing people to see themselves in the best light and their most authentic so that they can be happy, they can find joy, they can find themselves, and with them find themselves, the people around them will do the same, and on and on and on, and it's paying it forward in such a way that that 5 to 10 year plan of getting back on track will be something we achieve because more and more people will start standing up in a way that they need to, not because they're all advocates, but because they're being visible, they're being true, they're being honest, they're finding that their happiness was marred and dragged down because they were not being honest with themselves and true. As soon as it became true, there's weights lifted in some ways.
Savannah, thank you so much for sharing your journey, your clarity, and your passion with us tonight. Your willingness to speak so openly creates space for so many others, and we are honored to have had you around the table with the AOTR.
Thank you so much for having
Absolutely.
me.
Yes, absolutely. Keep writing, keep advocating, and keep being your beautiful, authentic self.
Thank you.
To our listeners, be sure to find Savannah Hauk's books and the Fox and the Phoenix podcast. I will have those things linked in the show notes. You can get these books wherever you get your media. And as always, stay open minded, stay compassionate, and we'll see you next time on Around the Table with Authors of the Resistance.
Thank you.